We jump on. Cool. All right, here we go.
And now, the list of things that you can buy at the Chicago Reader store at chicagoreader.com. Things to wear like Chicago Reader hats, t-shirts, bandanas, and face masks. Things for your daily life like the Chicago Reader camping mug, Chicago Reader tote bags, and a Chicago Reader reporter's notebook. Things for you to read like our Reader recipes, the Chicago Reader 420 Companion, our Chicago Reader Best Of book series from journalists Maya Dukmasova, Mike Sula, Ben Jarofsky, and Lior Galil, the Chicago Reader coloring book, and the Chicago Reader Stay Home puzzle. Find the Chicago Reader store at chicagoreader.com and show your support for the nation's first free weekly newspaper since 1971.
Your Ben Jarofsky Show for Wednesday, April 21st is just moments away. But first, we need to thank our sponsors. Sponsors like SEIU Healthcare, Illinois, Indiana, the Chicago Federation of Labor sponsors, as well as Chicago Reader. ChicagoReader.com for all things there is to know. The city of Chicago. If you're a clueless Chicagoan, get a clue. ChicagoReader.com and subscribe. You can also become a Ben head, which is a good way to help out the Ben Jarofsky Show. ChicagoReader.com/Jarofsky. JORAV as in victory, SKY for more information on how you can support the Ben Jarofsky Show and for our entire list of episodes. We are damn near to 1,000. We're maybe like 5 episodes away from 1,000. The Ben Jarofsky Show starts now. It is Wednesday, April 21st, and live from my apartment in his attic, this is the Ben Jarofsky Show. Today on the program, legendary Chicago journalist Monroe Anderson and legal eagle, ace attorney, Jim Coogan. And now your host, Chicago Reader columnist Ben Jarofsky.
Hello, everybody. Ben Jarofsky here. We're calling this Chauvin Verdict Wednesday. And here's why. You know why. Jury came in yesterday and found Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts. Couldn't believe it if I didn't see it myself. They read the verdict. Then Chauvin put his hands behind his back as this big old bailiff. I mean, this was a big, beefy guy. Slapped on the handcuffs and walked him out of the courtroom jail and presumably off to jail. I was like, damn, that was something I just could not imagine coming. In retrospect, I'm not sure how he thought he could have gotten away with this. Ladies and gentlemen, you will all agree that was cold-blooded murder. Over what? A $20 counterfeit bill that George Floyd may or may not have passed? MAGA has supported a president who's been bankrupt how many times? How many times has he been needed, bailed out by various banks? Overlooked. He's got like a outstanding debt to the IRS right now. I forget how many millions of dollars, but they're outraged over a $20 counterfeit bill that George Floyd may or may not have passed. Those cops hauled Floyd out of the jail, out of his car, slapped on cuffs, and then Chauvin gratuitously put his knee on his neck until George Floyd died. Anyway, a good chunk of the country either rejoiced or breathed a sigh of relief. God bless that jury for doing the right thing, because, you know, you can't depend on people to always do the right thing, even when the right thing is just staring them in the face. Speaking of which, the Republican Party. Yes, you can always depend on the Republican Party to do the wrong thing. They celebrated the occasion of yesterday's verdict by introducing a resolution calling on Congress to censure Congresswoman Maxine Waters. They said she had to be punished for attempting to stir up violence, because when asked on Saturday what should be done if the jury didn't find Chauvin guilty, Maxine Waters said, and I quote, "We've got to stay on the street, and we got to be more active. We got to get more confrontational. We got to make sure that they know we mean business," end of quote. Maxine Waters later pointed out the obvious, that she meant confrontational in the civil rights sense, as in good trouble, advocated by John Lewis, a civil rights hero who died last year, as when you confront injustice with marches and protests and civil disobedience. to which Congressman Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, said, "How dare she?" And he called on Congress to rebuke her. He said, "All Democrats are hypocrites." The Democrats criticize Donald Trump for stirring up an insurrection, but they don't criticize Maxine Waters. And all the Republicans in the land said, "Yeah, we're victims. You're meanies. We want to be victims too, so you have to apologize to us." For a while, it was kind of uncertain how the congressional vote would go. On the one hand, anyone with the grain of sense would know that there's a long history of black people in this country getting trampled, metaphorically speaking, which is what the whole civil rights movement is about. But on the other hand, a whole lot of white people get a little antsy when you remind them about it. They're like, "I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you talking about slavery and Jim Crow to me?" In fact, I just on a little tangent here, I got so many people mad at me right now. Yes, little old innocent me, humble reader writer doing a podcast in an alley overlooking a garbage can. I got baby boomers mad at me because I wrote a newsletter for the Reader pointing out how all these baby boomers who are saying, "What was Adam Toledo doing out at 2:30 in the morning?" were the same old baby boomers who bragged about fooling their parents, ducking out the door and rocking like rock stars, smoking reefer, driving their cars around town, staying out all night, getting so drunk they puked back in the day. Man, if I were a congressman, they'd introduce a resolution censoring me. Anyway, a lot of Democrats in swing districts, they're worried. The suburban swing vote in the suburbs, the one that Mayor Rahm worries so much about. Which way would they go? Would they say, "I'm outraged by Maxine Waters. I think I'll vote for the white supremacist party"? And yet, let's give Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, credit. She did the right thing. She stood by Maxine Waters and convinced all those Democrats to vote against the resolution. And Kevin McCarthy did the wrong thing. He rallied his Republicans to vote for it. Total party line vote. Couldn't find one Republican to essentially vote for civil rights. And sure enough, when the vote was over, the Republican political machine dispatched an email to voters in swing districts throughout the land. It went along the lines of, "Your congressman voted against law and for disorder." Quote, "They voted for violence," unquote. Be scared, white people. Be very, very scared and angry. Very, very angry. Say what you will about Republicans. They aren't dumb. They may be immoral, but they're not dumb. They know that the key to getting back the House and the Senate in 2022 is to scare the hell out of white people and keep black people from voting. So they moved to change voting laws in Georgia, Texas, Michigan, etc. And then yesterday, they sent out their message to white America. Be scared. Be very, very scared. Will it work? Stay tuned. Stay very, very tuned. We got a great show today, everybody. Monroe Anderson. Yes, indeed. You heard that correctly. Monroe Anderson. The man took a break, a much needed break to write a book. But he has returned. In fact, I'm looking at him right now. He's sipping tea, getting ready, doing some Tai Chi. Looking very distinguished because he got a haircut. Haven't seen him in a while. And Jimmy Coogan, ace trial attorney Jim Coogan, will join us. We'll be talking Chauvin trial. I had to reach out to Monroe. I had to force him to take a break from the book to come on the show because yesterday was just such a monumental moment in so many ways for America, at least for this century anyway. And I had to discuss with my old friend Monroe Anderson. So without further ado, let's bring on the great Monroe Anderson. Welcome back. Cotter, welcome back to the show.
It's good to be back. Did you sign the contract yet? You promised to double my salary before I came back.
I did. That's the real reason he took the break. I want to raise. He wanted me to triple it, ladies and gentlemen, but after hard, serious negotiations, I agreed to double it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the check is in the mail.
Check's in the mail. Now, by the way, I got to tell, I told Monroe briefly before we went on the air about this. I'm just going to read this to him. So the Reader put together an anthology of my greatest hits, stories I've written going all the way back to the 80s. It's an attempt to raise money for the Reader. And I'm going to be bringing on various guests who were featured in the anthology. People have written articles about going back to the 80s. And one of the people that I wrote about was Clarence Page, an old friend of Monroe. Monroe used to work for the Tribune. Clarence still works for the Tribune. Many, many years ago, Clarence put together an anthology of works by immensely talented Leonida McLean, an old friend of Monroe's, who committed suicide in the 1985, I want to say, or 84. 84. And Clarence Page used to be married to Leonida McLean. Anyway, he put together the anthology. There was a reading. I went to the reading. This is 1985. 86, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. 1986. Just think about that. How many years Monroe and I have been around. And so this is an article. But in the article, I completely forgot this until I read it. Monroe, I'm just going to share this with you. Monroe Anderson was such a troublemaker. Man, no wonder the Tribune couldn't. They're like, God, this guy's a troublemaker. All right, here we go. This is from the article that was written in 1986, Monroe. I'm reading it to you right now.
Okay.
During the 1983 mayoral campaign, Monroe Anderson, then a reporter on the Tribune, plastered his cubicle with racist literature released by the Bernie Epton supporters. Most of the black staffers laughed at it as though it were funny, but most, quote, knew it was laughter to keep from crying, Leonida McLean wrote. This is a reference to a column that Leonida McLean wrote, pointing out that Monroe, let's just talk about that for a while. You just put it in their face. You took the literature. I got to help millennials out here. Bernie Epton was the white candidate, and I'm underscoring white, that white Chicago rallied around out of fear that Harold Washington, the black candidate, might be elected mayor of city of Chicago. I'm going to point out that Harold was the Democrat, Bernie was the Republican. White people were so scared. I'm going to vote. They decided to vote Republican. They put out all this kind of racist literature, and Monroe Anderson, troublemaker that he was, put it up on his cubicle, a wall, so all the white people at the Tribune could see it. They couldn't deny it. Monroe, I'm surprised they didn't fire you right there and then.
There were suggestions along those lines. I was right before the general election, the Monday before the Tuesday election. I was on the Today Show, and Jane Pauley asked me, well, what would happen if Harold Washington loses? There's been talk that there'll be rioting in the streets of Chicago. That was a trick question, obviously. And so I had learned how to, when I needed to think about something when being interviewed, you claim that you didn't hear it. So I pointed at my ear to indicate that I hadn't heard it. So she repeated the question. And then I said something to the effect of, well, pretty much this is what I said. Well, I would hope not that there would be, to the rioting, that I would hope not, that there are a lot of people who are really emotionally invested in this election. The Tribune switchboard blew up. It was lit up with calls from coast to coast with people bitching about what I said. But the idea that there might be a riot if they cheated Harold out of the election. And there were reporters at the Tribune, white reporters, who said that I should be fired for saying that.
They publicly said that, or they just said it to the... I mean, they didn't put it in print.
To the editors.
Okay.
Not to me. But I did have white friends in the newsroom, too. So my white friends in the newsroom told me that there were people advocating for my being fired because I said that. And it just pissed Jim, God, what was his last name? I easily forgot. The editor, the executive editor of the Tribune, it put me further up on his shit list.
Did he call you in for Did he call you into the office?
Yeah, Jim Squire, huh?
Did he call you into the office?
No, he didn't call me into the office.
You didn't get sent down to the principal. Come here, son. I want to tell you something.
But he had he was at a meeting, the newspaper editors meeting that they had annual, all the newspaper editors, and he was talking to another editor who I knew, and who was black, who was married to my first wife, as a matter of fact. But anyway, gets complicated.
That's a tangent we didn't need to go down.
Right. But anyway, Squires told him, his name was Jay Harris, and Squires told him that he had two troublemakers, and I was one of the two. And the other wasn't really a troublemaker. He's just a friend of mine. So he's a troublemaker by association.
A black guy or a white guy?
A black guy. Right.
Yeah, man. That's I'm trying to. I mean, we got to get on to the news of the day, but there is some relevance because there was a lot of concern that there would be rioting, unrest on all the cities. You know, I think they called in the National Guard in Chicago
Right.
if the Chauvin verdict had gone the other way.
Right.
And so, I mean, in that regards, little has changed since 1983. I don't understand what you said. That was, excuse my ignorance, Monroe. I'm really trying to. I'm trying to figure out what you said that was so offensive.
I said there might be rioting. I didn't know. I would hope not.
Yeah.
Right.
What? The whole point is they were afraid of the rioting. You just
Exactly. I know, but my problem was that I couldn't because I grew up in segregated Gary, Indiana, and I never knew a white person until I went to Indiana University in Bloomington.
Mm-hmm.
I had yet to learn the ways of white people. And so,
Man, I'd have given you a lesson if you just come to me.
This is 82, 83. So I didn't realize that I was supposed to say, oh no, they would never do that. They would just accept it. I think that was obviously I'm still not really good at the ways of white people, but I think that was what I was supposed to say. I'm not sure what I could have said not to get in trouble. That's why I think it was a trick question.
It is a trick. I think now I'm thinking about it. If I were giving advice to you,
right?
If I could you imagine this back in the day? If like when you went in the world and I was like the white voice in your mind.
Yeah.
And so like they would say something to you and then you hear me. All right, Monroe, here's what you do. Okay. So here's what white people want you to say.
Right.
So I think what you should have said, in quotes, should have, is what was Jane Pauly? Jane, I would be outraged if that were to happen because there's no reason, absolutely no reason that black people should ever riot. This is a great country, and we've done really well in this country.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That sounds right.
You needed me, Monroe. And by the way, Jane.
The problem is, I'm not sure I could have, my mouth would rebel if I tried that. I would go, Let me tell you another situation. I mean, similar to this. We're off the track, but I was when I planned to leave the Tribune. I had a job at a job interview at the New York Times. So they flew me into New York, and I met with 3 of the top editors, and we're talking. And the first thing they want to know in my job interview is what did I think about Jesse Jackson calling New York Hymietown?
Mm.
That was the first question in the job interview.
Wait, and what year is this?
This was 84.
Oh, so it was right when it happened. I was going to say, if it was okay, yeah. The Jesse Jackson made those remarks in an interview with the Washington Post and when he was running for president in 1984. So go ahead, Monroe. Okay.
Right, right. And so I think I gave him the right answer, but basically I told him Jesse had a nasty mouth, and he said all kind of things about all kind of people, but he wasn't an anti-Semite.
Yeah,
which he wasn't.
No,
Jesse
isn't. He's still alive. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know if that.
Did they like that answer?
I think they liked that, but the problem I had, the reason I never ever worked for the New York Times, although they had approached me in earlier years also, is that after I had the interview, they were impressed. But there was a former New York Times reporter who was an editor at the Tribune. His name was Doug Nealon. And I was a troublemaker at the Tribune, and he duly reported as much. And so they sent all my clippings, everything I sent to them for the job. They had it delivered by UPS to my house to make sure I got it. And I never ever heard from them again.
Yeah. No, we could do a whole story about that, but I mean it's connected, and
right. Okay. Let's do the Maxine Waters thing.
Yeah, let's go to Maxine Waters. You heard my take on it. What's your take?
2 words: Mo Brooks. The congressman.
Yeah, explain that. Yeah.
Who on January 6th, 2021, was at a rally and was talking about going to the Capitol and having the fight. And I'm still waiting to hear Republicans criticize that or pass some censure on what he said, which was obviously violent. It wasn't like better trouble, good trouble or anything. This was trouble he was talking about.
Yeah. The whole concept of good trouble.
Yes.
That John Lewis advocated, the former congressman who passed away, I think it was about a year ago, a civil rights hero, stood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in face of advancing Alabama state troopers who were about ready to pound his head in because they were calling for civil rights. They did pound his head in. Yes, they were advancing at him. The whole point about good trouble is that you stir up trouble against these outrageous laws, these Jim Crow segregation laws. That's good trouble. I'm trying to think what good trouble the Republicans represent. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like when they went on to storm the Capitol, they were doing that basis on a lie that the election had quote unquote been stolen. So I'm trying to think like what is the good in this trouble that they're stirring up? Go ahead, Monroe.
Because from their perspective, the election had been stolen. Trump told them so. And therefore, they were saving America from being stolen and putting that socialist Joe Biden in office.
See, the thing is,
and by the way, just for a little salt in the wound here.
Oh God, here we go.
Remember when I told you Bernie would never fly?
Here we go.
Joe Biden, the Republicans have made Joe Biden into a socialist. You know, good old middle of the road Joe is now a radical.
Here we go. I knew there was a Bernie bash coming. I knew it was coming. Whatever. I just have to take it like a man and move on. I get so much grief. Now, Monroe is really, just in defense of Monroe, and I'm going to say this and see if you disagree with me, Monroe.
Okay.
Monroe is not a centrist. Okay. No. In the classic, I mean, Pete Cunningham comes on the show. That's my centrist. I got one centrist friend. Susanna Mendoza was on the show yesterday. She's a centrist.
Yes.
You know, I got some centrist friends. Monroe is a lefty, basically. But, and this is a point.
Liberal. That's how I describe. Just left of liberal.
Okay, just left. Did you vote for Reverend Jesse L. Jackson in the 1988 presidential election?
Of course.
Okay. Well, he was more to the left than Bernie. He was where Bernie was. So this rewriting of history that so many people did.
Wait a minute. If you ever saw the documentary that WTTW ran about the Black Metropolis, from DuSable to Obama. In that documentary, there's a quote from me back in the day when I was a young man, and the quote was, "Jesse Jackson will never be president." So I've maintained my sensibilities and common sense from Jesse to Bernie.
Yeah. But you still voted for Jesse.
Or not.
You still vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
I voted for Jesse, but I didn't vote for him thinking he's going to be president.
And by the way, just so everybody knows who wasn't around in '88, you could vote for Jesse. It was it was like me voting for Bernie Sanders in a Democratic primary, knowing that in all likelihood he would not win the primary, would not be the nominee, and in fact the Democrats would have a centrist, and they did, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. But knowing that I wanted to send a message to the Democratic Party about not abandoning its principles, and essentially the vote for Jesse Jackson in 1988 and 1984 is very similar, correct, Monroe?
Yes, very much. And I wanted to send a message so that we can have President Obama years later.
Not that it did a whole lot of good on a lot of fronts, but we'll spare Obama that one for the moment. All right. So Maxine Waters, yes, the Republicans clearly jumped on Maxine Waters' comment as a way to promote themselves as what? Victims, as outraged citizens.
No, it all goes back to January 6th. If they could distract everybody from what they did on that day, then it takes a weight off of them.
Mm-hmm.
So and they're very much into the whataboutisms.
Yes.
And so they tried to overthrow the U.S. government on January 6th, and Maxine made her statement a couple of days ago. And so it's, well, what about Maxine Waters? She's calling for the overthrow of liquor stores and Targets from coast to coast. And of course, that's the false equivalency of overthrowing the U.S. government. If you can't figure that out, then screw you.
Yeah. All right. So, Monroe, were you surprised by the verdict in the Chauvin trial yesterday?
No, because the prosecution put on such a brilliant job. They did such a brilliant job. I mean, it was thorough, and the defense was poop butt in comparison. But I was concerned that even in the face of all that, there may be one person on that jury that would hang it. It still could end up a hung jury, but it wasn't. The defense for Chauvin was, well, anybody or anything killed George Floyd but Chauvin. The exhaust from the pipe killed him, although it was an electric car. And we aren't sure whether it was running or not running. But even if it had been running, it still wouldn't have killed him. And the fresh air, like trying to catch the COVID virus out in the middle of Central Park all by yourself, that sort of thing. He had a big heart. He overdosed on drugs. Something killed him besides Chauvin having his knee on his neck for 9.29 seconds. And the final thing in the closing arguments, when they said, "Don't believe the defense, believe your eyes." And they had seen those. I mean, the thing was, one great line from it was, a 9-year-old girl knew that this was wrong.
Yeah.
She didn't know how it was wrong, why it was wrong, but she knew it was wrong.
But was there at the back of your mind, just like this fear that they'd still screw it up anyway? Just like somewhere in the back. I know I was a little worried about it.
No, one juror.
Yeah.
Because we don't know who was on the jury. Yeah, we don't know who's on the jury, and we don't know, and we sort of know their backgrounds. Some were Black and some were white and some were biracial. They sort of gave you that rundown, but you didn't know who these people were, except they all were allegedly ignorant. But other than that, because nobody had seen the full video. Only one person had seen any of it at all, and the others had seen segments of it on the news. But these were not people who were like up on what was going on in the day.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how they would swing.
Yeah.
I was worried about that. But the prosecution just did such a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, Ace Attorney Jim Coogan is going to be joining us. Monroe, feel free to stick around. We're taking a little break before we bring Jim Coogan on. We're going to take the deep dive.
Yeah, and I have a question for Jim.
All right. Monroe will have some questions for Jim, too. By the way, in the old days, when Jim would come on my radio show before I was unceremoniously fired, we would take questions for Attorney Coogan, legal questions, all kinds of questions. My memory is like all these questions. I've been looking at Coogan going, you know the answer to this? The guy was pretty good, man. It was like all kinds of, my landlord owes me money for the da-da-da. So everybody's an expert, but somebody's expertise is better than others. So we're going to take a break. Jim Coogan will join us with Monroe Anderson when we'll be analyzing what went down yesterday in the Derek Chauvin trial. How did the defense do? How did the prosecutors do? The tactics and strategies and what it means going forward. So we'll be right back with Monroe Anderson and Jim Coogan.
I'm a Trumpocrat. I'm a Trumpocrat. Trumpocrat, that's right.
Now we'll tell you what's best for you. That's the story from the editorial board. A little tip for the working man. Your employers are all our friends. That's the story from the editorial
I want an answer. I want an answer.
People want proof that the world ain't flat. We'll just give them their money back. Oh yeah!
Right now,
That's the story from the editorial board. That's the story from the editorial board. That's the story from the editorial board. That's the story from the editorial board.
I want an answer. It's not something you ignore.
I think you're 100% full of shit is what I think. If you think we
No offense, well, fuck you then.
hold on.
Okay, all right. Welcome back to the Ben Jarofsky Show, live from his attic.
Dennis just loves playing that exchange, and I love here. I got to tell you, folks, things are gloomy and down in the dumps. I just listened to that exchange between Alderman Raymond Lopez and our mayor, Lori Lightfoot. I go, it's not so bad out there. That's Editorial Board by Michael Girardi. We haven't played that song in a while. One of my favorite songs. All right, Jim Coogan is going to join Monroe Anderson and myself. Welcome back, Jim. Haven't talked to you in a while. Look, hale and hearty.
Hey, how's it going, Ben? I was wondering if I was going to get any more calls from you now that Bill Barr is not at the Justice Department. So I didn't know if we ran out of legal issues all of a sudden, but it's good to be here. And it actually is really good to hear Mike Girardi's editorial board, because it's very impressive that somebody could turn something like editorials and their, let's say, uselessness or half uselessness into a good rock song. So it's always a good listen.
It is amazing. He took the inanity of the editorial advice. The editorial boards try to look at any issue in such a way as to take away the controversies or the things that might get him in trouble. Yes, put a pronouncement out. By the way, we could have a whole discussion, and I'm going to hold back on this because you and Monroe are sitting here, Jim, and two very geeky people when it comes to the crimes of Donald Trump. I read Weissman's book, Andrew Weissman's book, Inside the Mueller Investigation. I don't know if you had a chance to read it yet. I read it. I checked it out of the library, and it makes such a powerful case for Donald Trump having just, what's the word I want to use right now, just thwarted that investigation, and he got away with it. And I just urge everybody, we'll hold off on this discussion. I may bring it back to you at the end, Jim and Monroe, but Weissman really lays out the case for Donald Trump having gone beyond anything that Richard Nixon did, in my humble opinion, with Watergate, in terms of intimidating the prosecutors and thwarting their efforts to bring justice. So we are not done with that one yet. I don't think anybody else is. All right, let's get your thoughts, Jim, about what went down yesterday. Monroe and I have been talking about it for a little while. From our point of view, we couldn't see how the jury could go any other way with the way the defense presented its case and the way the prosecutors put their case out. What was your reaction?
Well, I can tell you what my actual gut reaction was, because I saw the news flash that the jury had come back with their verdict, and I put it on my computer to see what was going to happen. I figured it was worth watching live. And the actual gut feeling I had when they started to announce the verdicts was kind of like an overwhelming kind of sadness. And I think, so even though our cases are civil jury trials, I know how it feels, like the gravity of that moment when you're actually waiting for the jury to come back, because you really don't know. Even if you think the evidence is very straightforward, you don't know. And I think the sadness part of it was probably for two reasons. One, even if justice is done, we're talking about a murder case. Nobody wins. It doesn't matter, even if justice is done, and Derek Chauvin should be convicted and should be sentenced. It's not a victory for anybody. And I think the other aspect, or the other reason why I felt that way, is there shouldn't have been this suspense. Because I think the president said it very eloquently last night, that this was a situation where everything was lined up. You know, that we very likely could have had the opposite outcome if there was no video, if there weren't so many witnesses, if people weren't brave enough to go testify about what they saw in the face of what could feel like a lot of intimidating factors. And with all that evidence, that's what it took to actually secure a conviction in a situation like this. You have a white police officer, or just a police officer in general, doing what they could otherwise have explained away and said, listen, you know, I think the official story was going to be, we encountered this person, we came on a scene, we effectuated an arrest, they had some kind of medical reaction, and oh, you know, it's a shame, but he's dead. And if it weren't for having a video, if it wasn't so much overwhelming evidence of what happened, and more importantly, like a video that captured everything, I don't know what would have happened here. So that, it's gratifying that the right thing happened, but you still don't feel, or I don't really feel, I'm glad that I think this is a step in the right direction, but I still have my concerns over whether the American justice system writ large can continue this momentum and keep doing better than what has been too much of the overall percentage of criminal cases for the last 100+ years, you know, in the times of modern policing in the United States of America.
To your point, Jim, my guess is without the video, without the eyewitnesses, charges would not have been pressed in the first place. So
Only
it just
without the intervention of the Attorney General's office prosecuting this case, and several of those lawyers doing this on their own time, not even getting paid to be part of that prosecution team.
Yeah.
They were very good. I mean, these were good lawyers who know what they're doing prosecuting this case. We've seen in other situations how there's inherent conflicts when a local prosecutor, state's attorney, district attorney, whatever they're called in that state, is trying to prosecute someone from the very same police department that they have to do business with every day. That's a problem. And that's one of the reasons why either the cases aren't brought or they're prosecuted with less than the same fervor than they would be if it wasn't a member of the same team, so to speak, that they were prosecuting.
All right, before I let Monroe ask the question or comment, I just have to ask you this point. Monroe and I have talked about this at length. That the job the defense did, in my humble opinion, and I think Monroe's as well, was so inadequate. So my question to you as a lawyer, is Monday morning quarterbacking, I understand. Can you think of any other strategy a defense lawyer might have employed in such a moment when it was so obviously he was killing the man? Do you think there's any other tactic or strategy that the defense lawyer might have employed to either win over the jury or hope from their perspective, win over the judge eventually with sentencing? Go ahead.
I think the sentencing part is still there. We don't know exactly how they're going to work that. I mean, that phase has not been entered into. They certainly will spend a lot of time talking about his record as an officer, the absence, I think, generally speaking, of prior incidents, the fact that he's, done a job serving the community, first offense, all that kind of stuff. I don't know what other the first thing that I would have considered is, would he have been convicted on less counts if they had entered into more serious plea bargaining and tried to plead guilty to something? But I think that there were reasons why I assume the client wasn't interested whatsoever. It's hard to tell. Even watching his body language yesterday showed him look very resigned to what had happened. I don't know if maybe because he sat through the whole trial, he realized how inevitable it was. And that's why he feels differently about it in April than he did 5 months ago, when I'm sure they must have had some kind of discussions about the possibility of a plea, because I don't really know what else you can do. I'm familiar. Look, there are lots of similarities between civil and criminal cases in this regard. Our clients, injured clients, insurance companies, and the defense attorneys that work for them, they'll look at and they will point to what lawyers and doctors call comorbidities, like heart conditions, lung conditions, or it's not a comorbidity exactly, but drugs in somebody's system. They will look at, I mean, that's part of the quote unquote causation defense that they have here. It's one of the things that you do. I don't know that it was effective here. There's lots of cases where it's not effective. And sometimes defense attorneys, I think, get themselves tied into knots trying to focus so much on those things. I think it fell very flat here. But the only thing I would say in their defense, not that I'm really trying to defend them, is I don't really know what other strategies. I haven't heard anybody express cogently what those defense strategies could have been. Because once you take that man into custody, this doesn't really require police use of force experts to explain it. Once you take that man into custody, he's now under your control. Now you're responsible for what happens to him. If he's no longer, if he was resisting arrest, but he isn't doing it any longer, then that no longer plays a role in your explanation as to what force you used and how much of it you used. And so what else can you say? What rational person could look at that video and think that any of this was necessary? So I don't know what else they could have done. I mean, I'll give them that they really had very little to work with.
Monroe.
Yeah, they did have very little to work with, but a couple of things along those lines. First of all, had the prosecutor been some standard issue white prosecutor instead of Keith Ellison, who is a black Muslim, I don't know if it would have been pursued as strategically and as thoroughly as it was the prosecution. And the other thing is, I think that things may have worked better for Chauvin if the defense was the police department and policing in America in general. That this is how it was done, this is how he was following the culture, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that the police union was paying for the defense, and Nelson was hooked into the police union. So that never would have been a case. Okay, now for my question to you, Jim. Mm-hmm. It's been reported that Chauvin and George Floyd knew each other. They worked together at some bar or something where Chauvin was the bodyguard. Floyd was a bodyguard, and Chauvin was outside security. And so they knew each other. Why do you think, this is a legal thing, why do you think that didn't come up in the trial? Why wouldn't the prosecution use that? Because it could have been a personal beef that he did.
I was curious. I mean, I remember that part of the story from last summer, from June, a week or two after the incident happened.
Right.
Because that was Floyd's job before this, and he had been laid off because of the pandemic, because it was like a bar restaurant that obviously was closed like everything else was, where you'd have congregating people. I don't remember from subsequent reporting if anybody really found a link. It seemed initially like that might be an explanation for why there was more to this, because otherwise, other than, when you watch these kind of interactions, and now we have so many more situations that we can actually see because of either cell phone videos or body cameras. When you watch these interactions, typically the overreactions by police officers look to be generated by heat of the moment, just fear, poor decision making in those moments that are so quick, and they are. Look, it's not an excuse, because part of the training is to deal with situations like that, but you have to admit that these are rapid succession, instantaneous decisions being made by officers. So it's either that, or it's one of those situations like that disturbing arrest in Maryland, where the Army, I think he's a Ranger, or he's active duty, and these cops are completely freaking out. The guy's doing nothing to incite any of this, and it's almost like the cop is taking it personally, and now they're trying to inflict some kind of revenge, or they keep escalating the situation as if they're being second guessed, or their manhood's being doubted or something. So those seem to be the broad categories of why these things happen.
Yeah.
I don't know what, once you have Floyd on the ground and you could at that point cuff him, put him in a vehicle, take him to the station as like you normally would under normal procedures. There's nothing else that happens along either of those tracks. So that, it seems like that could have been the explanation, but they, I assume, looked into it and couldn't find anything, couldn't find anything definitive enough, or it was too speculative. Maybe somebody knows something and they never came forward. Maybe there was an altercation that nobody else was a witness to, you know, because, I don't know, somebody's friend, a friend of Floyd's, a friend of Chauvin's, was drunk at the place. The other one had to throw him out and they didn't like it. And they said, you should have come to me first. And now nobody knows about that because nobody else witnessed that argument. And, and he remembered being mad at Floyd over the incident. You know, I think that that's something that maybe Derek Chauvin knows about, because the Fifth Amendment protects him from ever offering any information about that to the prosecutors. That stays hidden. I mean, that could have been, because who knows, maybe that would have added to the prosecution's evidence, because there was a personal beef and somehow he was fortunate enough that nobody else could be the source of that information.
Yeah.
And without it, then there's no way to introduce that evidence. There's no way to even make the argument. Not to mention that if you are the prosecutors here, if you didn't find out something solid on that,
right,
why even bring it in? You know, what you have at the end of the day is, it's exactly what Mr. Blackwell, one of the prosecutors, highlighted in his rebuttal, which is about as simple and straightforward as it gets. Lawyers love to be able to say, ladies and gentlemen, this is a simple case, and here's why.
Yeah.
They're all copying off Ben Jarofsky when he says, and here's why. Because you want to make it simple, because that means that your case comports with common sense.
Right.
So if Blackwell can come back and say, folks, you saw the video, you don't even need to worry about the rest of this. What else can anybody say about this case? Then you can, without introducing any of those other things, you strip away the opportunity for other defense arguments. You know, now the defense can use this distraction and say, well, hey, they didn't really prove that. Because here's the thing. Remember the burden of proof. It's fundamental to every prosecution and every civil case. The burden of proof is where everything stems from that when I'm explaining things to clients. So if you're the prosecution, you must prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. If you raise more issues, the defense can kind of obfuscate and say, well, look, they brought up this personal beef thing. Were you satisfied with that proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Right. That isn't an element of the crime, but because you've introduced it, now suddenly you may have set yourself up as a prosecutor for having to prove something that you actually can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And you've given one of the jurors an opportunity to go off on a stray tangent, and you got a hung jury, or you hang on one of the counts, like the most severe situation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Jim, you mentioned something. I got to follow up on it. Chauvin did not testify. He took the fifth. First of all, I can't recall seeing that in a courtroom where the defendant actually just said, I take the fifth. I just thought they just took the fifth, or they just didn't testify. But be that as it may, your thoughts about that? Do you think he should have testified? Go ahead.
Look, one of the bedrock principles of our criminal justice system that I think the founders were right on when they wrote the Bill of Rights is the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. Because I think that was novel in the 1790s. I don't think that existed anywhere else. Obviously, the constitutional republic was new, and creating that civil right was a pretty powerful statement in people's ability to defend themselves against the government. Now, plenty of other things have gone wrong in the application of that over the years, with confessions that were beaten out of people and so on and so forth. But so I just want to say, like at the outset, that is fundamental. But and the jury is always instructed to be very clear on the idea that the refusal to testify is not taken to be any sort of admission, and it's not supposed to be interpreted as anything at all. They're not supposed to weigh that in any way in their deliberations. Does that really happen? I mean, because in this situation, if you're sitting there as a juror, I think your common sense impression is, if there were an explanation for what happened here and why Chauvin so casually just continued to put this kind of lethal force on a man's larynx and neck, who else would know but Chauvin? And nobody else came in and said, hey, I was there and he told me, I'm really worried that if this guy gets up, he's going to stab us all. Or I'm really worried that this guy's so amped up on whatever, adrenaline, drugs, something that we can't control him if I release him from this force. So nobody else said it. If that was, I think as a jury, you might think, well, maybe that's why. But if he's not even going to tell us, then I guess there is no reason. I mean, that would not be, it's not exactly a fair inference to draw under our Fifth Amendment protections and that jurisprudence, but I can imagine them thinking that because besides his explanation, and if there is, and if they can conclude, well, I guess he doesn't have an explanation, how could you, what are they left with? You're not giving them even like the thinnest reed upon which to think this was somehow reasonable use of force. If there's no excuse, then why is he doing this? I mean, that's the problem with this video. It's one of those things that's so inexplicable without some other explanation, and you're left just kind of feeling depressed that this happened, and it looks awful, and then there still is no explanation. Now, what else do you expect besides a conviction on whatever they charge you?
Well, all right. And really at the risk of being the Monday morning quarterback, I will say this. Jim knows this. I'm no lawyer, but I am obsessed with trials. Just got finished reading, by the way, the latest Michael Connolly novel, Jim, Law of Innocence, I think it's called. And it's he has this whole Lincoln Lawyer series that he does, where the trial lawyer is the star of the show. And in this particular case, the trial lawyer himself, Mickey Haller, is accused of murder. And he's defending himself. Okay, so I'm really into these things. Following up on what Monroe said, I'm thinking of things like the Twinkie defense from way before your guys' time. Well, Monroe was alive, but way before your time, Jim, back in 1979, I want to say, where a former police officer, Dan White, shot the mayor of San Francisco and Harvey Milk, George Moscone and Harvey Milk, and he argued that the reason he did it because he consumed too much Twinkies. He was enraged. Remember this, Monroe? I know Monroe remembers this.
Oh yeah, I was in San Francisco on vacation when the murder occurred.
Yeah, it was a horrible, horrible murder. And the thing is, Jim, when you do that, when you take a peculiar defense like that and say, well, there were these circumstances that motivated me to do this, you're admitting wrong. And to Monroe's point, that lawyer, that defense lawyer, was brought there by the police union, and they don't want to ever admit that a police officer did anything wrong or anything outside of the standard rule book that police officers are supposed to follow, even if he has his knee in the man's neck and his hands in his pockets. That's the part, like, you know what I mean? He's gets hands in his pockets. So it's really hard to think that he's feeling afraid. I would think that a creative lawyer would come up with some kind of equivalent of a Twinkie defense to sort of undercut what we're seeing in front of us. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, you're right that if the defendant cop is trying to offer an explanation, then that would be interpreted as an admission that what he did was wrong in the first place, or that it is outside the regular scope of use of force guidelines. And you're right that one of the most powerful defenses that any officer in the situation can offer is, listen, this is just how we do things. Now, that fell flat because his own chief fired him and testified that that's not how they do things. But and this goes to the uniqueness of these circumstances, right? I mean, that, again, to Biden's point in explaining this and framing this, and he's not the only commentator who did that, you not only have the video, you not only have all these eyewitnesses, you also have an extraordinarily callous and casual depiction of Chauvin while he's doing it, but you also have the blue wall of silence didn't defend the man here. They didn't come in and either say nothing or say, this is how we do things. There wasn't there. I mean, they had their own defense on an argument as to that, but they really weren't supported by the actual department in coming in and explaining and defining their use of force guidelines and saying that this is part of the training. So that's another prong that his defense team really didn't have in their at their disposal another prong of the typical defense of these cases, leaving them again without much to work with.
Jim, your thoughts about Maxine Waters' comments leading to a potential overturning on appeal? Do you think the defense lawyer will move in that direction? And what's your thoughts? Go ahead.
So my reaction to that in general is that from a legal perspective, jurors' motivations are they're not really a strong basis for any appeal. I mean, there was the comment from the trial judge saying, Mr. Defense Counsel, I can understand how that might have given you something to work with on appeal. Then it depends on the outcome. But there won't be, jurors aren't expected to, nor do they offer a rationale for what they do. So they speak by their verdict. That the Latin derivation is they're saying something, and what they're saying is the truth. That's where verdict comes from. So it's guilty. And if you listen to the process, they do the same thing in Illinois, where the judge will go around and call on each juror and confirm that was, in fact, they call it polling the jury. Was that then, and is it now your verdict? Yes, 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 yes. You go down the line, and then he even asks again to the group, is this what say you all? And you heard a chorus of yes. That's it. There won't be there's not a subsequent procedure where they all file affidavits saying, and I was worried about the city breaking out into a riot. And I also heard what Representative Waters said and figured, well, if she's saying that, then the odds are even greater. So I knew I had to convict the guy because I didn't want my house to burn down. I mean, that won't be out there. The only times, the rarest of occasions where juror motivation is actually, where they look behind that, is actual jury tampering, bribery, extortion. Something where a juror comes back and says, guess what? I got a note in my mailbox during the trial where somebody said that if I don't do the right thing in this case, my cat's going to go missing, or, check under the hood the next time I start my car, some kind of actual threat, or somebody comes forward and says they know about a bribe that was paid to a juror to let a defendant off. So short of that, the odds of that being a successful appeal, I don't know what Minnesota, I didn't study what their law is on that kind of appeal, but they are few and far between in being successful to say that somehow because listen, public pressure is always a factor here.
Yeah.
The jury itself is supposed to be the conscience of the community, and they're supposed to speak on behalf of the community. They're supposed to be a representative derivation of the people in that jurisdiction. That's the point. So if the people in that jurisdiction are outraged at this conduct and want to find the person who did it under the color of law, committed murder, want to find him guilty, then that would be consistent with the community's outrage as opposed to unduly influenced by it, at least in my opinion.
Well, to the point of public pressure, I'm going to ask both of you this. I'll start with Monroe. To the point of public pressure, I mentioned earlier, if there was not a clear video of Chauvin with his hands in his pocket and his knees on George Floyd's neck, I'm not sure there would have been a prosecution to begin with. I'll go one step further. I'm not certain that there would have been a prosecution had not for the fact that people immediately took to the streets.
Across the world. Right?
Across the world, but really in Minneapolis. And Monroe, your thoughts on that? I know that we're supposed to say, no, they would do the right thing and trust, and you shouldn't in any way. It gets back to that anecdote you were alluding to, Monroe, back in 1983 when they asked you on the Today Show, would there have been rioting? If Harold was defeated by Bernie Epton, I struggle with this one, Monroe. I don't have a clear answer to this. Would the state of Minnesota have done the right thing and brought charges against these? Don't forget, we'll get into the other officers who are facing trial without the public pressure. Your thoughts, Monroe?
Okay, again, I go back to Keith Ellison. Had there been a different attorney general? No, for sure. I'm pretty sure Keith would have tried at least. He would have tried. He would have pursued it. Just like I forget her name, but the black woman in New York who's the attorney general. I mean, you have a different breed in the past, a generation ago. Black people were not in positions of power, and so things got passed because we had to beg for people's goodwill and etc. Now you have Black Americans who are in the driver's seat, and they aren't as understanding as white prosecutors can be in these situations.
James, that's the attorney in New York.
Yeah.
Jim Coogan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think that's a great point, because ultimately what it takes is he's a public office holder. So if the people in his state, in Minnesota, are clearly clamoring for there to be a prosecution, then that should influence his decision making. And I guess it would have been fascinating to try to test Monroe's hypothesis if it was 25, 30 years ago and it was a white officer and a black man was basically murdered, and you had a white male attorney general. Would they have done nothing? I think the odds are probably good. But the other thing is we wouldn't have had a cell phone video. So then you also don't have the thing that's so powerful to motivate everyone. And that's why those things, that's why we'll never even know. How many times
30 years ago, you had Rodney King.
You had a video there, and that wasn't enough.
Exactly.
Then you get into the insane, change of venue that occurred in that case,
Right.
where they moved the case out to the
Right.
very white suburb. I mean, that looking back at something like that, I guess that's what sets us up to now. Have
Right.
this feeling like, boy, anything can go wrong, and because the American system of criminal justice is so screwed up. Maybe we're past it. I don't feel like we are until we get way past. This is one of those things where you want to outrun the wave by a few hundred yards before you feel safe that the tsunami is not going to pull you back in again. And especially if you're a black man or woman in America, why would you feel any other way? You'd have to be, you have the benefit of experience to not trust that the system would figure this out. So, back to like what the system here would have provided for, or what the influence of public perception and public outrage. I don't think that, I think everything came together as kind of a perfect storm here. So it's good because this is justice in this situation. You can't, it's hard to imagine how any other outcome would have made any sense. But again, because the odds of having everything come together exactly the right way, where maybe billions, hundreds of millions of people all felt on one side of this issue, and even people who would really, really like to give the cop the benefit of the doubt couldn't find some kind of shelter and some kind of thin reed to stand on here. This exception could, hopefully not, but could still just prove the rule. We don't really know how this is going to play out in other situations. But I do believe, like we've been dealing with in the city of Chicago for the past few days, the proliferation and use of video, even though video can be conflicting, you can have more questions than answers after watching a video. But at the same time, I still think it's better than only getting one version of events, because, if a cop is interacting with a person and that person's dead, there's only one witness at that point. Maybe there's another cop, so those people are, in theory, they might defend each other, which is something that we know has happened, even if we can't always prove it, it's happened. So more video, more alleyways with video, more, a bank across the street with a video, getting different perspectives. It can't be a bad thing in the sense that at least we'll have more evidence. It'll force people to deal with these situations more. The fact that this was pushed like this will also force the United States, Americans, voters, taxpayers to reconcile with this, because ultimately, Ben, we've talked about this before. These kind of things cost everybody lots and lots of money. We want to fix our roads, bridges. We want to be able to pay for pensions for police officers. Well, it's easier to do if you're not, pardon the phrase, but pissing away hundreds of millions of dollars. And just in the city of Chicago in the last 15 years, I've seen that study. It's like $600 million or something like that. That's insane.
Right.
And it's not making anybody any safer, right? If your goal is to make society the most efficient as you can, or government to cost as little as possible, which everybody who gets a property tax bill would prefer to do that, then you have to change the system. And you have to change police training and strategy. Escalating things, turning them into life or death events is not making anybody safer or costing us less money. So it's basically the stupidest possible way to run things.
Right. The thing that makes me optimistic about the guilty conviction with Chauvin is that before Chauvin, the attitude was, as a cop, is I will get away with it. This is why Chauvin could sit there with his knee on his neck defiantly looking at the 17-year-old who was videotaping the whole thing, because he was absolutely positively convinced that he would walk on this, that he was the police and he can get away with it. He didn't. And so I'm optimistic because now, for the first time, police have to think about that. You know, maybe I'll get away with it, maybe I won't. So maybe it's not necessary for me to do all this. Or if I do it, let's make sure no cameras are around.
Well, let's close with a tougher matter. Get your thoughts, both of you, on the issue of the Adam Toledo shooting that we were talking a lot about on this show. And this is a case I've had guests on who have been on both sides. Troy LaRoviere, I urge everybody to check out that interview from Friday. He believes that the officer should be held accountable for shooting Adam Toledo. Susanna Mendoza was on yesterday, said she was a little uncertain about it, that the officer had a split second to make a decision, and he was defending his life. Now the matter is in the hands of Kim Foxx, the state's attorney, and she's going to have to make a decision as to whether to prosecute the police officer. I know there'll be a civil case. Or there may have been already a case filed. I think the family's lawyer said that they will file a case. So there will be a civil case, but I'm talking about a criminal case. And I'll start with you, Jim, and then we'll close with Monroe. What do you think will happen? What do you think should happen in the matter of the Adam Toledo shooting?
It's a tough video to watch because if you're putting yourself in the shoes of the officer, he's issuing instructions. I think he has a belief as he's chasing down the young man Toledo that he has a gun based on the reports that they have, and that they didn't find a gun further down the alley where he started. So he has a belief that he's got a gun. He's ordering him to get rid of it. And it's more clear from the other video that the Toledo actually tosses the gun. So when he turns around, the first thing, he can't really say, the officer can't really say that he saw a gun, because you don't see a gun. And it's not one of those things where he's holding a cell phone in his hands and maybe because of the flashlight, it looks like it could be metal or something like that. So it's hard to see what the excuse is. But Comptroller Mendoza's right, and other commentators are right, that this did happen in an immediate split second. The kid spinning around can certainly present a situation where you're not sure what to do. I don't know where he was aiming for. I don't know, is one of the things you can criticize him for. Why was he aiming with what would be a fatal wound, but they're trained to shoot at center mass? Could he have tried to disable him instead? It's a much tougher case. It's not the Chauvin case. It's not some casual and almost clearly intentional murder. And when you're being pursued, running like that, it creates a situation that it's going to be more dangerous. But I'm not trying to blame a 13-year-old boy here either. So I don't know exactly what Illinois' procedures are, whether it's something that could similar to Minnesota, could be taken out of the hands of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and prosecuted by the Attorney General's Office with Kwame Raoul. I don't know if they do that. I'm just not sure if there's a history or a process for that. It can make it easier because they're certainly removed, like I was talking about earlier, instead of being in a hand in glove situation like the state's attorney's office is with the Chicago Police Department. But I guess I'll be honest, it's not a decision that I would want to have to make. But maybe I also don't know what the new use of force statute and some of the police reform rules that they've made into law, how that might impact statements that officer either already made or was required to make. And I know they changed the rules on when they can make those statements and if they can amend them, because maybe he has an explanation depending on what he's done with his Fifth Amendment rights, etc., that might explain this. You know, that it would be my goal anyway, if I was the one who was charged with reviewing this, to try to find out as much information as possible.
Yeah.
Because it is a tough one. I'll be completely honest about that. That's what I see.
Monroe?
I agree. It's a tough decision. And I have mixed emotions about it because the boy was 13 and he did not have a gun in his hand when he shot him. But on the other hand, the police officer is in a hot pursuit, and he is running off of adrenaline. And so he may not, it may have almost been a reflex for him to shoot when the kid turned around, although he didn't see a gun. And he didn't give him, I'm sort of leaning towards a trial though, because he told him hands up, and he put his hands up and he shot him. But it was in a forward motion sort of situation, so it's tough. It really is tough.
It is a very tough one, but I could tell you this right now: if there are charges brought, the defense will have far fewer challenges, obviously, than Nelson faced in Minnesota.
Right.
And I just got to believe that police officer would testify, because if you watch the whole footage, immediately it's as though the officer knew he had messed up big time.
Yeah.
As opposed to Chauvin, who's like looking at the camera going, you can't touch me.
Right.
You know, I'm just going to kill this guy, you know, and get away with it. And you're just going to go home, or I'll arrest you.
Right.
Whereas the officer, if you watch the whole footage, immediately runs over, starts giving aid to the kid.
Right.
It's a horrific across the board video, as Jim was saying. And I know, Monroe, you agree. So obviously the circumstances are vastly different. The outcome is the same. There's a dead person, but the circumstances are different. And so if there was a trial, I mean, who am I to tell a defense attorney how to handle it? But I would implore, the police officer to take the stand and try to explain what was going through his mind. But Troy Laravier's point of view, which I must express, is that you cannot say you're putting your life on your line if you're not literally putting your life on the line. And I know, Jim, you heard the interview, you heard that part of it. I don't know if Monroe did, but he was saying that police officer at that moment, he made that decision to pull the trigger before he could just absorb the information that the kid didn't have a gun.
Yeah.
And so that is unacceptable behavior. That's Troy's point of view. So just to give Troy his opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is a tough one. I don't know if charges will even be brought. We'll be following this one very clearly. Final thoughts before I let you guys go. There's 3 other cases that Keith Ellison's lawyers have to charge. It's not over yet. Jim Coogan in Minnesota. How do you think that's going to go?
Well, I don't know if they're all going to be trials. I guess this all goes back to square one of whether there's, what the utility is for those officers to insist on defending themselves and don't want to plead. I mean, it's a whole different set of facts, but I guess I still struggle to figure out why weren't they doing anything? Why weren't they questioning Chauvin more than they did? It adds to the tragedy. I feel for, and I think everybody watching some of this testimony or hearing clips of it, feel for the witnesses who are still riddled with survivor's guilt over what they watched, knowing that a man died. And even if they did something, and thankfully they did, as witnesses taking videos, later testifying, they didn't intervene. But who, how can you? You know that's a police officer. He's acting under color of law. He could pull his gun on you. You could be arrested. And who knows what he's going to do to you, because from what you're watching, he's murdering someone right in front of you.
Right.
But the officers are in a different situation. Why are they deferring to him? I don't understand what their explanation could possibly be. Again, this is not the prescribed use of force here. This is not what they train people to do. Once you have someone in custody, you don't put potentially terminal pressure on their ability to breathe. So what are these guys thinking? They should be charged. That seems like justice to me. And I guess, frankly, after this is done, maybe they'll lose some steam and figure, what's the point of this? Let's just, because that's the whole point of a plea bargain. Let's go back to square one.
Yeah.
You settle cases because there's something in it for you, unless the prosecutors are saying, we don't care, we don't want your plea bargain. Because they don't have to. They don't have to offer them anything if they don't want to, if they want to continue. But then you get into, is this a reasonable use of resources to go through trying these guys? If their defense lawyers are calling up and saying, listen, we know what's going to happen. Can we get some kind of, second degree, whatever, indifference, something, and serve some minimal sentence or not even serve a sentence? I don't know if those guys deserve to be in prison, but it sure seems like they clearly had more. They should have done more. They should have done something. So if you're just asking just blank slate, what does justice feel like? Something has to happen because they did more than just screw up on the job here. They weren't blind to what was happening right in front of them. It went on for 9 minutes.
Yeah. It
It wasn't just one split-second gunshot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll be curious to see as well. I don't. It's hard to feel sympathy for them in this situation, even if they just kind of froze. You even and one guy's he only had been an officer for a very short period of time. But you're a human being. Where's your judgment at? What are you thinking about? All you think about is policing and arresting. Like that's what your training is. So at what point do you it occurs to you, this isn't going well. Something bad's going to happen. Maybe I should say something or radio this into the boss or whatever. So,
Monroe, your thoughts?
I want to see them receive some sort of punishment. If it's only if they get 60 days in jail and something on their record, because we've got to condition the police into not killing Black people just because they feel like it. And that there won't be any consequences if they do, or in aiding and abetting. We just, this is where things need to go. And after with Chauvin in jail and others up for trial, the more cases that are made against police and police brutality, then it will stop at some point. When you're at risk, then your behavior will improve, and so we need this.
Yeah, it's called a deterrent, and it's so funny that we talk about deterrents, just crime in general that are committed by quote unquote civilians, but somehow or other deterrents has never really have been applied in police cases, with the exception of being the civil matter, again, which the public as a whole will pay out on these cases, as Jim pointed out, as though the public was at wrong. When I guess you could obviously say they put up with it, Monroe. So I guess, we put up all those. When we began the show by talking about Monroe being a troublemaker in the 80s, and we'll close it with this reference, Monroe. You and I are old enough to remember this. Throughout the 80s, John Burge and his
Midnight Crew
were torturing Black suspects. and into confessing crimes that they may or may not have committed. And this was happening in Chicago. Yeah, so the public is paying a price, but in real time, the individual cops do not. All right, very good. Jim Coogan, thank you so much. It's been too long. And Monroe Anderson, I know you're a busy guy these days, but thank you very much for taking time. This was a momentous moment in American, it was just American history, modern history. So I'm glad you two could take the time to come talk to me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Okay. You guys take care. And I'll talk.
It was my pleasure.
That's Jim Coogan and Monroe Anderson. I'm Ben Jarofsky. I want to thank them for joining us, and I also want to thank the man, myth, the legend, the pride of joy in Alton, Illinois, without whom this show would be possible. And as Monroe and Jim Coogan can tell you, back home in Alton, they call him Dr. D. Give yourself a raise, take it out of petty cash. See you tomorrow, everybody.